Thanks, Paul. We were going to have question and answer, but I thought he'd ask me how the Highlanders were going, and he'd ask me how the Blues were going, and that would have been difficult. I've been asked to talk about innovation, and I hear that's the theme of the conference, and what innovations did the All Blacks bring to stay ahead of the pack and explain those innovations to the group here, and then talk about leadership or some generally interesting tales beyond this. So that's the brief. Well, goodness me, I don't think there's any magic wands personally or silver bullets. I just think it's about the group of people you're working with setting some strategies and you trying to make sure you implement those well and improve those strategies as you go along. And I thought I'd talk about the Rugby World Cup. It may be of some interest, and why I think we smashed the French by a point. And I probably wouldn't be standing here if we hadn't. So everybody wants you when you win by a point, and nobody wants you when you lose by 2. But I think I've got about 7 points. I'm told good speakers have 3, because the audience can't handle 7. But looking around, I think you can. We've probably got an above IQ audience here, above the norm. So hang in there. I think one of the things that the All Blacks respected and were motivated by was the legacy of the All Blacks over 100 years. And that legacy is the best of any sporting team in the world. Now, I was appointed coach of the All Blacks in 2003. I didn't know that. And probably a lot of people sitting there who are very much into sport don't know that. But this team has got the best record of any sporting team in the history of sport. And that's quite incredible. And that's hugely motivational for the All Blacks. They want to add to that legacy. That's very important to them. They've won 29 out of the last 32 Test matches, and a Bledisloe Cup and a Tri-Nations in 2010, and a Grand Slam in 2010, and a Rugby World Cup in 2011. And if we hadn't had Dave Gallagher and Wilson Winteray and Buck Shelford and David Kirk and the history of that, I don't think we'd do nearly as well. And by putting that up in front of these young fellas, that gets them up there, makes them play. And this country's got huge legacy in sport. And perhaps we don't use that legacy enough with our rowers and Snell and Holberg and Walker and so on. And I think that's huge as far as we're concerned in rugby. We had a cry in the All Blacks called the GOAT. G-O-A-T, greatest of all time. And that particular statement and the cry that the boys used after games and during the week was aspirational to them. Nobody else knew about that. So they wanted to be the greatest All Black team that ever put on the black jersey with the silver fern. So that's the first thing. A Grand Slam. Many of you out there will probably think it's easy. Yeah. Because the All Blacks have done it pretty regularly over recent times. But it's only been achieved 9 times. My mathematics is not sharp. 9 times in the history of Grand Slams by Southern Hemisphere countries. The Springboks last had a Grand Slam in 1960-61. They've had 4. That was the last time. The Australians have had 1 in 1984. The All Blacks have had 4, the first in 78 and 3 over the last 8 years. And that's huge to them. I remember the last time in 2010 we were playing the Welsh at the Millennium Stadium, and we had the photographs of Graham Murray's 78 side and the 2000, and I'm guessing here, 2005 and 2008, and we had a blank square underneath those 3 photographs, a black black square. And when they came off the field, the photograph of the winning team was there, and they were very proud of that. When we go on tour, we have an All Black club, and that All Black club moves from one hotel to the next, and we have honours boards with every player on that honours board, with the success they've had, the number of tests, the Tri-Nations, Bledisloe Cup, Grand Slams, wasn't much on the World Cup, on that notice board. So that meant a huge amount to them, all right? I think the second thing is that we had the right people on the bus. May sound a bit arrogant, but I thought we had the right people on the bus. People like Peter Gallagher, and some of you who know who he is. He's the physiotherapist for the All Blacks. I think he's the best in the world at prehab, rehab physiotherapy. Huge empathy with the troops. Gilbert Anoka, who's a sports psychologist, who's a facilitator for the All Blacks, who's the glue of the team. He's a mental fitness skills man, I guess. I'm not quite sure how he would like me to give him what the title he would like, but he's pretty important. World class again, I think. Nick Gill, who's a conditioning coach for the All Blacks. He's got a PhD in exercise physiology, who pushes out the boundaries on explosive, quick, powerful athletes. And he's pushed out the boundaries over the last 4 years. So these people that we have got in this group, I believe, are world class, and world class as a team. You know, to have three coaches, Smith and Hansen and the other fella, who'd all had international experience, made a huge difference to that team, I believe. You know, they'd all coached in 25 test matches prior to being All Black coaches. I think there's a lot of kudos in having experience. If you look around the world at the most successful coaches, a lot of them are old, late middle-aged. Wayne Bennett across the ditch in rugby league. He's the most successful rugby league coach. I'm not sure how old Wayne is, but I'd say he's over 60. Sir Alex Ferguson, I think he's over 70. He's the best football coach in Europe, perhaps, certainly in England, highly respected. I looked up a website about USA coaches because I wanted to be right. The first three are John Wooden, who was a university basketball coach, and you would have heard of him, Vince Lombardi and Phil Jackson. They were ranked 1, 2 and 3 on the USA Order of Merit for coaches. I don't know who judged them, but there they are. And most of their successes are when they were in their late 40s and their 50s and their 60s. It's not a self-pat on the back situation here, but I believe that the best coaches in sport are those who've been around a bit and had a lot of experience. If you look at the Super 15 right now, you've got the Chiefs, I think, probably playing the best rugby, all due respects to all the rest of us here, and Dave Rennie has done a huge apprenticeship, and I think that is showing. And also Tom Coventry and Smithy are there, and I know Smithy's outstanding, and I don't know much about Tom, but again, you've got a mature group of people coaching a sporting team, and they are more mature than their competitors, who are all ex-All Blacks. And only Smithy in this case is an ex-All Black, and apparently he's number 3. I can't imagine that. So I'm just saying that the right people involved with the team, I think, was important, because they had the experience. They'd had the experience of losing a Rugby World Cup. The Rugby Union had the balls to reappoint those people, and probably against history. It was against nobody had ever been reappointed before, and there was quite a push in the media for change. You may have noticed by some people. So there was king makers and king breakers out there, and they had the guts to hang in there and reappoint people they thought could maybe do the job. So I think having the right people, and I'm not only talking about the coaches, but other people there, was very important. Often in rugby, and maybe in your sport, once, say, an Olympics is finished or a World Cup is finished and the successes haven't quite been there, you change everybody and start again. All that means that those people are going to take at least 2 years to get their feet under the table and will not learn from the past. I'm delighted that the All Blacks have got 11 of the 14 management team reappointed for this year, and obviously Richie and Daniel and a lot of the senior players are going to be there as well, and I think that enables them to keep on evolving and getting better, and rather than starting again and people learning the ropes, and that'll take some time to do that, and they'll go backwards before they go forwards. The third thing, which may be quite applicable to the group here, is the resilience with connections. I think our resilience increased because we connected with people inside the All Blacks and outside the All Blacks. Maybe we hadn't always done this very well. I'll explain. There was a lot of alignment between coaches and players on how to play. I know that sounds simplistic, and why didn't that happen all the time? But sometimes coaches will have some ideas and players will have other ideas, and some of those ideas will marry and some of those ideas will not be discussed as much as they should be. So you don't get total alignment. Alignment between the coaches and the medical team. The medical team includes the conditioning person or the fitness coach. Are they ready to play? Can they play? No, we don't think they should play. Thank you, they won't play. So that alignment was total. We had a case management session each week where we had an action plan for each player. We might have to fine-tune that action plan to make sure they were playing to the best of their ability. So each of those players was discussed every week with that player and making sure that the action plan was correct. The wider rugby family, the New Zealand Rugby Union, the CEO and the board, there was constant dialogue, not always agreement, but constant dialogue, interesting discussions. But I think the important thing that there was respect between the two groups and what we were trying to do. Also with the high performance department of New Zealand Rugby and the commercial sides of the game. Also that connection with the Super Rugby teams, with the coaches, the conditioners and the medical team. And I can assure you that reconditioning and rotation were very much alive and well. And so it was done a different way from it was done in 2007 to 2011. So connections within the team and outside the team, I think, gave us greater resilience. Another strategy was having what we called the crow's nest, know what is required to win in, say, 2 years' time. So we try to look ahead and anticipate what we needed to do for athletes, both in the way they played the game and how they prepared. We thought we needed explosive, strong, quick athletes who could handle a more demanding game physically and aerobically. We thought we needed athletes who could handle pressure. By having a World Cup at home, you understand what that pressure was like. You know, I would be walking down the street and the car would stop, which was passing me, and the window would wind down and say, "You better win this time." And I'd say, "Well, thanks for sharing that with me. We'll do our best." But that's what the boys were experiencing every day, every week, leading into the World Cup over the last 2 years. I think we needed to give the guys ownership, make it their challenge, rather than we taking the pressure off them. So it had to be their challenge. Self-improvement, both of the management team and each player, was a major focus. And the game itself, tight forwards who could pass. Geez, that's revolutionary, isn't it? Tight forwards who could actually catch and pass, a back three who could catch both in defence and running forward on attack. 14 on defence at any one time. So once you made a tackle, You didn't finish that tackle till you're on your feet and available to do the next one. Those sort of things. So having a crow's nest approach, I think, was important in the 2 years leading into the Rugby World Cup. The next strategy, there is no I in team, but there is in win. And so one of the greatest challenges in life is beating yourself. And if you can do that, I think that went a long way to achieving the team's goals. So self-improvement was a major focus. Each player had an individual player profile, and I'm sure that's no different from the sports that you're involved in. So they had a map for self-improvement, and that map came down to a daily requirement. They had 7 pillars in that individual player profile. There was a holistic pillar, how they worked outside of the game, what their life was involved. And that was very important. So if they had their act together off the field, normally they played a lot better on the field. And those IPPs were plan driven. I think they were key to what we're doing. They gave that individual player a very clear map of where he was going to get, what his goals were and how he was going to get there. Can I have a water? Is that possible? I'm starting to dry up here very badly. Thank you. Just some of the things that occurred during the World Cup on those IPPs. 26 out of the 30 had a personal best in lean muscle mass. Yeah, huge, eh? What does that mean? So they had a reduction in body fat and an increase in body muscle, and 26 of the 30 improved leading into the Rugby World Cup. There was a big shift in aerobic capacity, the ability to run for longer. There was a 5% general improvement across the board in aerobic capacity. You had guys like Brad Thorne getting better at 36 than he was at 32. Conrad Smith being able to kick the ball. Yeah, kick the ball into the wide channels, you may have noticed. I know it might not sound that significant, but it led to us winning rugby games and him extending his ability to play the game. Thank you very much. That's very good. I even had... Cheers. Oh, it's beautiful. I got back from Perth yesterday after a week in Perth. It was a very nice trip, but I'm drying up. I even had situations where guys like Kieran Reid, for example, who some of you will know about, and most of you have heard of, who's a very fine young man who's going to be captain of the All Blacks, I would imagine, in years to come when Richie retires. He was with the Crusaders and they never played at home. So they're always on tour. And we decided, leading into the World Cup and the Tri-Nations, we would give some guys some space so that they could recover from the Super 15 and all their travel and peak for the Rugby World Cup. So we left him out of 2 of the Test matches out of the 4 in the Tri-Nations. He didn't go to South Africa. Then he arrived in Brisbane for the final game of the Tri-Nations before the Rugby World Cup, and then had a serious high ankle injury. And then he took about 6 weeks to recover and play in the finals of the Rugby World Cup. Story is that his mother, of all people, came and saw me and thanked me because we were sensitive to what the boys were doing and how much rugby they were playing and how much they were travelling and making sure we looked after them so that they could peak playing Rugby World Cup and get the best out of themselves. So the holistic approach and making sure we had a pathway for each player was pretty successful. Sometimes best laid plans don't work though, in his case, but that's just an example. A guy like Ma Nonu, who seems to be a person that people talk a lot about, became an absolute pleasure to have in the group. His ability to empathise with the fans and our commercial partners and the media in the main was outstanding. And when he first started, he struggled. So Those individual plans and those self-improvement objectives were very critical in the success of the All Blacks in this Rugby World Cup. Our next point is about pressure, and I think you can relate to it. I'm sure you can relate to it if you come from Christchurch and you've gone through a couple of earthquakes and you know what that is, how that is to handle, and most of us got no idea about that. But these guys are under extreme pressure. Self-made pressure, pressure from the media, pressure to win, pressure from the opposition. And I think being able to understand about pressure, to embrace it, to go towards it, and don't avoid it, and treat it as a challenge to be beaten, was very important. Now, we try to make it real, and we made statements like a group of young New Zealand men are going to win this thing at some stage. It might as well be you. It might as well be you. So those things we thought were pretty important. We had if you look at a pressure continuum, 0 pressure to 100, these guys have got to perform at about 80% pressure. And if they can handle 88 out of 10 pressure and never reduce their ability to play the game, then I think we're getting somewhere. We talked a lot about what they do if they can't handle pressure, how they're going to react, and so they're going to go into what we call a flight or fight or freeze mode. And you probably saw in 2007, in that quarter-final of the Rugby World Cup, guys in freeze frame, if you like, possum and headlights, what the media call choking. And that's common when sports people are under huge pressure. They freeze, and so they can't react and play well. And we called that the redhead. And in comparison is when you are functioning when you're under pressure, you see and do, you make good decisions, you play with an intensity and accuracy. That difference between the red head and the blue head became part of our terminology, just like catch and pass or tackle. We did a lot of work on simple brain biology and how the mind works when it's under those sort of pressures. We did a lot of work on situational awareness so that guys were very aware of what they had to do in certain circumstances. So a lot of rehearsal, a lot of repetition, randomised training so that they're under pressure by introducing different things all on top of each other, so they had to react to that and handle that. And we talked about Rugby World Cup history, and we hadn't done that in the past, believe it or not. So in 2007, we did the same as we did in Grand Slam tours. We took one game at a time. We thought, well, if we can nail this game this week and do the right things in the build-up, we'll be fine. And then do the same for next week. So just build during the week and play bloody well on the weekend. We tried to do that in 2007 in the Rugby World Cup. It didn't work as well as we had hoped. So we dissected Rugby World Cup and said, well, why is it different? Why is it different from our normal competitions? Well, other teams play better than they normally play. The All Blacks sometimes hadn't played as well in those major games. Form meant nothing. Form going into the tournament meant nothing. In 2007, we'd won 19 out of 20 games. Before that quarter-final against the French at the Millennium Stadium. So we had great form. The thing that we couldn't handle the unexpected. We couldn't handle Wayne Barnes in 2007, who happened to be the referee, and he was different and created a game that was very hard to handle for our guys, and they couldn't handle the referee. We couldn't handle injury in 2007. We lost Carter during the game, and we also lost his replacement, Nick Evans, and finished up with number 12 playing number 10. So we just had to handle the unexpected. I don't know why, but we certainly got the unexpected in 2011. So when Daniel Carter tore the adductor tendon off the bone. That was a situation that we just had to handle. When Richie McCaw broke his metatarsal and played with a broken metatarsal for the finals, that's a situation that he had to handle, and he handled it magnificently. We finished up with having to play 4 number 10s, and Daniel and Colin Slade and Aaron Cruden and Steve Donald. So we had to handle that unexpected situation. Because, as you guys know, more than probably anybody else, it doesn't matter what the circumstances are, you just got to win. And I think by going back and looking at the history of the Rugby World Cup and things that had happened, like 1995 and the so-called food poisoning situation, and saying, well, if those things happen, we've just got to get over the top of those things and make sure we do the business. And I think that helped immensely. Guys were strong mentally. They handled the unexpected. And the last 20 minutes of that final, I don't know what you guys were doing, but I was shitting myself. And there was flashes of 207, and how does your family handle it again if it's going to happen again this time? Only flashes, but they were significant. I was talking to Richie at the Hellbergs, and he said to me, Ted, that last 20 minutes are the best 20 minutes of my life. You know, he's a different man. He's an extraordinary sportsman, but he believed that because all the things that we had worked on, especially in the mental toughness area and being able to handle pressure, had come about that we had to handle them. And he was just delighted with the clear direction of the team in that last 20 minutes by the guys on the field. He was delighted with the discipline. He was delighted with the way they all did their own individual jobs and nobody tried to do somebody else's, so they believed in each other, etc. I was saying, kick it into the corners, guys, put a lot of pressure on, turn the ball over so we can score some points and get out of the heat here. And they were saying, let's not take any risks, just keep the ball, bat out time and win this game. So they took no notice of what the coach was saying, and they were dead right. And when guys like Andrew Hoare and Artie Williams and Steve Donald came on the field, they added to the clarity. And Steve Donald's story is an amazing story because he's not a great player, as many of you have told me. All right? But he's a top bloke, and he's a real good Kiwi, and the guys love him. And when he came on, you could see he was pumped, but also the guys really gave him a lot of self-belief by the way they reacted to him, both the subs bench when he went on and the players on the field. So, special guy, he became a national icon overnight, really. But again, you know, if you want innovation, I think the knowledge of how the mind works and how to handle pressure was probably one of the keys. Just finally, people will handle the challenge if it's their challenge. So we try to give the players as much ownership as possible. And so we had dual management of the All Blacks. We had 7 leading players who were Mills Miliaina, Conrad Smith, Daniel Carter, Richie McCaw, Brad Thorne, Kevin Mialamu and Andrew Hoare. And they planned with a group of the management every campaign we had. And we often met pre-season during the Super 15 3 or 4 times at various venues planning the year. And I think that was hugely important. So we would chunk the year, chunk the season. Those who know a wee bit about rugby, we play, and those who don't, I'll explain. We play a 3-game early season campaign against Northern Hemisphere opposition. Then we play a Tri-Nations, which is 6 test matches against Australia and South Africa. And then we have an end-of-year tour. We break those 15 games or whatever into about 7 different chunks, and we have objectives for each of those, mindsets and skill sets on what we want to achieve and how we're going to evaluate that going forward. Those 7 players are very much involved in devising the objectives, the mind and skill sets required for those chunks. The off-field leaders, we've got 3 off-field leaders, Conrad, Brad and Kevy, and their job is to look after the guys who are in their first or second campaigns. And so they're very much about rubbing shoulders with the new All Blacks and making sure that they're progressing in the environment and getting better. Done informally, over a coffee, over breakfast, over lunch or whatever. They're outstanding, those 3. Had great empathy with the young guys. The young guys thought they were marvellous. And then we had 4 on-field leaders, who are obviously the other 4, Daniel and Richie and Mills and Andrew Hoare. I spent a lot of time with Daniel and Richie during the Super 15 to make sure we had alignment on how we played. After 40 years, or 37 to be exact, of coaching, you'd think you'd know how to coach. It's amazing that you're still learning, and I'm sure if I was still doing the business, I'll still be learning. But to spend time with those 2 was, over the last 2 or 3 years, was probably the best thing that I did. So I'd go to Christchurch, have dinner with them, talk the game, and just have a small part of the game each time we discussed, a small part of the jigsaw. I've tried to be simplistic. If we have a scrum on the left-hand side of the field, we may have 3 or 4 or 5 setups to attack from that scrum. All right? I would bring that material with me to discuss with these 2 gentlemen, and we would have a consensus of what we'd do. We'd reduce that to 3, and we might have a number of players off those 3 setups. In the past, we might have had 4, and I'd see 2 functioning and the other 2 not happening. And I'd say to Daniel, what? You know, I couldn't work it out. You know, here we are, we'd practiced them, we'd talked about them, but they wouldn't happen. Daniel was the sort of kid who didn't like conflict, but if he didn't agree with something, he wouldn't do it. And I'd be sitting there thinking, what the hell's going on here? So by just spending the time and getting agreement and making sure we're all on the same page, he actually did it, which was bloody great. I felt good. But to take that a little bit further, he, like Richie, is a Christchurch boy, and Ted's a Christchurch boy. And he's moved out of there, so he's widened his horizons a wee bit. But they are actually pretty focused, those 2 guys, and don't like change. And have got certain ways of doing things. So by just discussing various options, managed to get a wee bit of change there. Not drastic, but a bit of change. And we got a consensus. And then when I saw what's happening on the field is actually what we agreed on. And so we ticked that box. So that alignment between coach and player and spending the time, I thought became very important to what we're doing. That on-field leadership group of those 4, Carter, McCaw, Miliaina and Hoare, became very important. We'd meet every Sunday, we'd plan the week, we'd train Monday, Tuesday, we'd meet Tuesday lunchtime and make sure we'd tick the boxes of what we wanted to do. We'd plan Thursday, so everybody knew exactly what we wanted to do. That group also had an individual operating unit, an IOU. So those 7 players had 3 players or 4 players that they were responsible for. For example, Mills Miliaina had the fullbacks and the wings, Conrad Smith the centres, Carter the 5/8 and halves, etc. And they talked the game with that group and talked the strategy for the game we were playing on Saturday, and probably talked about a lot of other things that I don't want to know about. But one of the big things about professional sport is the guys don't talk about it a lot. When they were amateurs, when I was coaching in the amateur time and coached guys like Sean Fitzpatrick and Grant Fox and those sort of gentlemen, they would want to talk about the game for hours. And after the game, when you're leaning against the bar, you did more coaching than you did during the week, believe it or not. And they just loved talking about the game. The guys who are professionals now, who are involved with it 7 days a week, once the game is finished, they want to have some downtime. They want to get out of there. So having individual operating units where they talk the game made a lot of difference to some of the players. Jerome Kaino, I think, learnt a huge amount from Richie McCaw and Kieran Reid, for example, and progressed to a world-class player because I think they discussed the game a lot more because they had a structure to do so. So, now you're looking at, what was the word? Innovations. I think the reason why the All Blacks do pretty well and have won 29 of the last 30 test matches and have done well recently and over 110 years is the legacy, is the right people, is the connections within the team and outside the team to our major stakeholders, is the crow's nest approach, trying to assure that you're looking ahead and how the game is developing and making sure the guys have got the right mental skill set and physical skill set to handle the game in the future. Individual development is critical. Handling pressure is massive as far as this team is concerned because they're expected to win every game. And making sure that the guys lead and it's their challenge. So thank you. Question time. Thanks very much.
Graham, that was a fantastic insight into the All Blacks in 2011. I got the 7 points. You see 6 there, I know, but I had missed handling pressure as a separate point. And I just wanted to chat to you about that particular point yourself, because you talked about the 4 guys in the leadership team. Daniel got injured. Richie was injured. Yeah. You had Mills not playing in every game, and Andrew Hoare often on the bench. So what sort of strategy did you use to sort of have that on-field leadership when those guys actually weren't playing?
Very perceptive, Paul, as always. The amazing thing about Daniel Carter is that he went to Melbourne 2 days after he had the adductor tendon problem. Had an operation in Melbourne because that was the most experienced surgeon in this part of the world to staple that tendon back onto the bone. Sounds very sophisticated, doesn't it? And he came back and just continued his leadership role. So he worked very hard with Aaron Cruden and Steve Donald. You would never have known. Like, he was fabulous. Mills continued his leadership role, so they still took their individual operating units. Even though we had 7 leaders, Kieran Reid ran the line out. Ma Nonu was a key player in defensive strategy, and those guys just stepped up. But the other guys continued with their leadership role even though they weren't playing.
You talked earlier also about the fact of having the right people, and the experience was really important. You've been a leader of young men for a long time with the roles that you played in education and principal and then amateur days and coaching. How big a factor has that been in terms of what you can impart on people and the experience that you've got being a leader of young men for a long period of time?
I think it all helps, but we made a lot of mistakes, especially with leadership, which I think in team sport is critical, that the players take over the leadership of the team. Like, I don't actually play, believe it or not, which is very understandable. So Carter's played 86 tests. I think Richie's played 103 now. And they've got huge leadership ability and great knowledge of the game, but they've got to be given the leadership. And originally, when we first were appointed coaches, and Gilbert Anoka was there also, and he's the facilitator of the leadership model, we were very formal in our leadership model. So I think we had 11 leaders. They had portfolios of responsibility. So we had guys in charge of media, sponsorship, training. So we had one guy would attend the coaches' meetings and put his input into training. We had people in charge of new All Blacks, etc., etc. And we had a meeting once a week and they would report in on their portfolio and we had minutes and all those things. We thought we were doing the right thing. Most of them didn't like it, didn't like the formality, didn't like the responsibility as such, wanted to be rugby players who led. In the finish, these 7 guys were example setters, led by example. They walked the talk at training and in games. Sure, they worked with dual management with the management team to set the scene and set the environment and set the culture. But really what we asked them to do was be the best players on the field and to lead by example and be inspirational to the other guys in the team. And by that being an extension of their ability to play the game, they did that much more comfortably and enjoyed that particular responsibility. But just let me stress that there was other guys leading as well, although they weren't included in the leadership group. I've mentioned Reid, I've mentioned Nonu. I could mention others, I guess. Who should I mention? Jerome Kaino, for example, who became, with Ma Nonu, a key player defensively, as you could probably see. So he killed a few people out there with his physicality and his ability to do the business defensively, and he led in that area, which was critically important.
You talked about the pressure leading up to it, the cars driving alongside saying, you better win it this time. For you and the team, did the pressure mount as the tournament and competition went on? Did it get any different from what it was at the start? Did you feel more pressure at the end as you got closer to the final and things got building, or was it constantly there right from day one?
No, look, I think part of being a coach is how you handle that. And I don't know how you people perceived how I handled it. Perhaps I shouldn't know that. But I think part of coaching international sport is being able to get yourself in the best nick you can to be able to do that job. And I think that's a key to coaching, one of the keys. And when you talk about individuals improving, I'm talking about management and players. And I found if I could be totally prepared, then I could be totally organised. And what I mean by that is if I'd done my homework, we're playing England, I'd watched them play a lot. That might be 40 hours of viewing. And I knew how they ticked. I could pass that information on in a short period of time during my responsibilities at training. And Smithy would do the same in defence as I do in attack, and so on. So having that sort of organisation and preparation made me feel good, and if I could do that, I could coach. I also needed to be sharp myself, and believe it or not, Paul, I used to go to the gym or do some exercise every day. I know it's hard because you're close to me and looking at me, but that made me feel good. I had a personal trainer by the name of Mike Cron, who's the best scrummaging coach in the world, and he is part of our management team, having the right people. And we used to go to the gym every morning and he'd say, Ted, I want you to do A, B and C. I'd say, yes, coach, and I used to do it. And he used to work alongside me, same with Gilbert Anoka. He was there too. And that 5:30 in the morning, 6 o'clock every morning, bloody good. Made me feel good. So I coached better. And I think as you get older, took me a long time, you start to get to know yourself and what you have to do to perform. And so self-awareness, I think, is hugely important for people who've got responsibility, no matter what the responsibility is. In my particular case, people are pretty aware of what my responsibility was, but it just made me function a lot better. Rugby World Cup, was I under pressure? No.
Well, I remember seeing you in 2004, I think it was, in Carisbrook.
Yeah.
Played England.
Yeah, I was under pressure.
First test.
First game, mate.
First game, 38-3, the All Blacks ended up winning. I saw you before the match. In fact, I saw you that afternoon as well. And Clive Woodward was the coach of England. You looked a little bit nervous that day.
Yeah, well, first test.
Yeah, you were. Well, you'd coach Wales and you'd coach the Lions, but...
Yeah, but when you're coaching your own country, it's special. very special, and it's quite a considerable difference in it. You feel very privileged to be there, and you just don't want to stuff it up. But as I say, you know, I think you get better as you get older, and because you're more aware about yourself and what you have to do. But in the Rugby World Cup, it was only in that last 25, 30 minutes that I actually felt the pressure. I'll tell you what, I don't want to go through that again.
You haven't watched it yet either, have you? You
No,
haven't watched it on replay?
No, I haven't
That's something
watched.
we both share in common. I haven't either.
No, I will one
You
day.
let me know when you do, and then I might have the courage to be able to do that.
Yeah.
Where did the nickname Ted come from?
I'm sure this has got a huge relevance to innovation.
Well, it has. I mean, it's a very innovative name.
Well, it's something to do with sport. There was a guy named Ted Delahunty who was the scorer for Canterbury cricket in the 1950s, maybe early 60s. And I got to know him quite well, and he asked me to run the scoreboard at Lancaster Park for cricket. And I had to get other young guys to assist, and the test matches were in school time, so I was very popular for a couple of weeks. And the guys used to call me Young Ted, after Ted Delahunty, the scorer. Young Ted got dropped. The young got dropped. Now it's just bloody Ted.
Now, we've got time for a couple of questions from the audience. I'm going to see if Burton Silver's here somewhere. Where's Burton here? He was one of the speakers yesterday morning, cartoonist and writer, and very much an innovator. Now, I had the pleasure of sitting beside Burton last night at dinner, and he was asking me this question, and he said, ask Graham Henry this question. I said, you ask it himself. Away you go, Burton.
I was wondering whether there was a point in the last 20 minutes whether you had a planned fallback position. Do you have a wonderful move that you've all worked out very much in secret that you can only do once ever, because once you try and do it again, you know, everybody will know what you're going to do? Did you have a move like that? Do you ever have moves like that up your sleeve that you can say Z5 and they know what to do and they all dance around in a circle and then do something and we all stand on our feet and cheer because a person slips through there where they shouldn't slip through, and it all happens? Or am I just dreaming?
No, you're not, Burton. You're right on the button. Are you talking about an escape move once you lose, or you're talking about during the game? No, the try that Tony Woodcock scored in the final against France was a planned move, believe it or not, obviously. But we hadn't used the move for 3 years. It was a very successful move. We called it Teabag, because that's one of Woodcock's nicknames. Very sophisticated. And we do dance around, you know, one group went that way, another group went that way, and we went through the middle. Bloody sophisticated move. Won the World Cup. So it hadn't been used for 3 years. And you have those things that you put on the back burner which you think you need to bring out in special occasions or special games. And we might have had, say, 4 of those. But you have to be in the right position on the field for that particular move, that one, to work. We happened to be there, and there it was.
Were there the other 3, they just didn't come up? They weren't in the right place. I mean, 1 point.
No, they'll be in the back burner for 2015. You'll be able to see it then. We'll sit next to each other and we'll chat about it then.
We've got time for a couple of questions to wrap things up.
Ted, you've obviously built an amazing culture since 2004. You've had changes to your management team. You've obviously come under a bit of pressure and could have been biffed out at any stage following the loss in the quarterfinals, which I think was the first time New Zealand had ever lost in a quarterfinal in the Rugby World Cup. We've seen the Breakers have back-to-back wins, and their owners being interviewed on TV. They're a bit like yourself. They've shy and reticent people have avoided TV. And they have a policy in the Breakers of a no dickheads policy. And I hear Ant Strawn talking about it the other day. We've obviously got some problems within Super 15 teams in this country, and I wonder what your opinion is on that and how the culture that's been developed within teams and how important that's been to your winning over the years.
It's a bloody long question.
Yeah, actually, I had a second one, but I'll wait.
No. You've done well. Sit down. I think part of coach's responsibility is to develop people, and if they've got some character traits which are not positive, I think the first thing you do with a group of people is try and sort that out, because they're talented young people and maybe have a lot to offer. Now, Jimmy Cowan's a prime example. Like, Jimmy Cowan had a drink problem. I don't think he's got a drink problem now. And he's a very special guy in that group. Not hugely talented as a footballer, but a very, very good team man. And if the guys had to vote on their 3 favourite players in the group, he'd be one of them. So I think it's the coach's responsibility, or the management's responsibility, with the senior players perhaps, to try and assist those people. My wife, Raywin, gets very irritated in netball because some of the girls that she thinks are very talented get titled with a negative title and say, well, she can't play because she can't do A and B. And mainly it's because of some social or cultural thing in their background which they can't handle. So that's what I think we need to do. That's what we do in the All Blacks. If you go on and that person doesn't respond, I think at some stage you've got to make a decision. And every now and again you get a player that you can't change, and you make a decision, and that decision is you don't select them. But I think in the first instance you need to do the business and try and help. I think there's very few rugby players, personally, or very few sportsmen who cannot be helped. And there's no dickheads policy is currently been banded around. Personally, if all our young sportsmen at 19 are perfect, I'll be very surprised. So I think our job is to fix the dickheads so they're right for the future. And if you can't fix them, you don't select them. But just having a no dickheads policy, I think that's pretty broad and not correct.
Final question to wrap it up. We're all done. Oh, hang on there.
I think the legacy looks after that, very much so. You know, I heard Richie talk recently, and he's very much of the opinion that we go forward from here. We get better as a team, and I totally agree. They've got, as I said, they've got a legacy that they will try to add to, which is hugely important, and there's no greater motivation than that. They've got a group of people who know what the All Blacks are about. There's 11 of the 14 management back from last year, so they can keep on evolving and getting better. The captain, McCaw, and the vice-captain, Carter, and a number of the senior players are there. And there's a lot of good young players coming through the system. Now, this country is quite outstanding in the development of young sportsmen, or young sports people, probably as good as any other country in the world. And so we're very fortunate. And in rugby, we're extremely fortunate. I think the development pathway for young footballers in this country, young rugby players in this country, is second to none. So as I say, there's no excuses for not going on and keep on evolving and getting better. The challenge is that England and Australia and South Africa and others are trying to do the same thing, which is great, which keeps you on your toes. So I'm very positive about the future.
So that was the final one, but I saw Martin Toomey. He was fitness advisor for the All Blacks in 95. He was assigned to Jonah, asking him to get him fit in 95. Marty, you had a quick question to finish.
Yeah, it was more a personal one, right? 8 years, huge success at the end. Have you got 3 favourite moments of your 8 years?
3 favourite moments Marty's asked Graham to name over his 8 years involved with the All Blacks.
Oh, hell, Marty. Rugby World Cup, 23rd of October 2011. I had the feeling of pride and a group of young guys, and what they did still makes me emotional. And like what Richie McCaw did over the last 3 weeks was beyond belief. Like, I was fishing with him a couple of days after the tournament finished, and we were having a quiet Steinlager Pure, as you do. And I looked down at his feet, and one foot would look like a balloon, and the other foot was normal. How he played, I've got no idea. So great pride in that group of people, not only the youngies but the oldies as well, the people I work with, who are a special group of people, and that's what you miss, is the people, and I miss some of them already. A feeling of peace, that after 37 years of coaching, you've managed to tick the box that you wanted to tick, and that's a huge feeling of peace. Go outside of that, I was a young guy in 1973, and I worked in Christchurch, and a guy named John Graham rang me and said, "There's a job at Auckland Grammar. Are you available to take it?" I was a phys ed teacher, and that was the best decision I made in my life, and I really feel a lot for DJ. He was my personal mentor, and I think you need personal mentors, and I still see him regularly, and he gave me an opportunity. It wasn't so much going from Christchurch to Auckland, but it was working in an environment where there was hugely high standards, led by a person I respected immensely, and he gave young guys he thought had abilities, opportunities to do things. And if I hadn't come to Auckland Grammar School at that time under John Graham, I don't think I'd be standing here talking to you. And I applied for the All Blacks in 1996 or 1995, so I was trying to work with you, Marty. That was my inspiration. And John Hart got appointed the job, and I was bloody annoyed. I think the vote was 6 to Hart and 1 to Henry, and I couldn't believe that. But I'm delighted I've missed. So I missed. Now I'm delighted I missed the job. That wasn't one of the highlights, but I just thought I'd mention it. I don't think there's anything. I think probably the other thing was getting reappointed to coach the All Blacks in 2007 after the Rugby World Cup. The team, and there was a very long question over there, pointed out we got beaten in the quarter-final of the 2007 Rugby World Cup. The team couldn't handle the pressure, and that game was a very bizarre game of rugby. And some sitting there will know what I'm talking about. And all we said after that game is we didn't play as well as we'd hoped. The French played better than we expected, and we didn't get the bounce of the ball. Now, we kept on saying that for 4 years. And I think the team handled that situation well. Some of New Zealand didn't handle that situation well. If we hadn't handled that situation well and bitched about Wayne Barnes and bitched about the game, I wouldn't be standing here again talking to you. And so I got good advice on that because I was pretty edgy at the time. But you do that because you want to protect McCaw and the team. You don't want them to come under pressure. They're under enough pressure. There was enough. It was a very difficult time, and you didn't want to add to that difficulty. So I think handling how the team and the management handled that defeat in 2007 was particularly important. I wasn't going to stand for the All Blacks again. I thought I was history. There was enough history in New Zealand rugby to think I was history. And I had to review the game, and I was in a place called Hervey Bay, which is northern Queensland. I wouldn't recommend it as a holiday place. But I was there, and I got up early in the morning to analyse the game. It made me physically ill. I could only do one half, and it took me 3 days to go back to it. And so analysing the game helped me a bit, made me very well, but helped me realise that it was a difficult game for the boys out there. But also when the reports came back from everybody else about that particularly World Cup, there was a lot of support for the coaches. And I knew that I had to stand then because as a rugby coach of the All Blacks, you put a huge amount of pressure on young guys to perform and to stand up and be counted. It was my time to stand up and be counted, and so I had to stand. And I was surprised but pleased that they reappointed me. So thank you for listening to me, and hope you've enjoyed the conference. Cheers.